This is ordered. Now, how would you tell a computer to generate this string of letters? Well, you could give it 3 instructions. You'd have to tell it when to stop. But apart from that, you could say, select an M, select an E, and repeat. Notice number 1, this again is very simple. It would only take 3 instructions to tell a computer to generate this. Randomness was 2, this is 3. That's not very many. Secondly, it's specific. You would tell a computer to pick an M and then an E and then repeat. So it is specific. Note, third, it is repetitive. You have a little unit that's repeated over and over and over and over again. Now, number 4, this is a little harder to grasp, but the parts are prior to the whole. Now, let each part be an ME. How many parts do we have? We have 500, because I suggested we have 500 MEs in a row. So what we have is 500 little parts where each part is an ME stuck together. Now, which came first? Not the chicken or the egg, but which came first? The individual MEs or the entire string of MEs? Which came first? It's pretty obvious that the individual MEs came first, because the whole is just a string of the individual parts. Does that make sense to you? Now note, if we took an ME out, suppose we came up and took number 75 out, so that we had 1 to 74 and 76 to 500, we just had a little toothless gap right there. Now if we took number 75 out, would ME 276 sitting down here care? Would it make any difference to this ME whether 75 was there or not? No, it wouldn't, because it would have no knowledge. I'm speaking figuratively here, but it would still be sitting there fine, just as it was if we pulled one of these out. Now that means that the parts are prior to the whole. If you can remove a part and it doesn't do anything to the rest of the whole that's essential, then the parts are prior to the whole. Now, the third kind of configuration would not be random, and it wouldn't be simple order, but it would be information. And an example of this would be John loves Mary. Now notice, to tell a computer to generate John loves Mary, we first of all have to get specific. Print a J, print an O, print an H, print an N, print a space, M-A-R-Y space, and so on, L-O-V-E-S, and then Mary. Number 2, it's not simple, but it's complicated. Instead of 2 or 3 instructions, this would take 15. If it were the Gettysburg Address or the book of Romans, now we're getting up to a lot of instructions. Number 3, it's not repetitive. Notice that in John Loves Mary, you don't just have a little unit that's repeated over and over and over again. And number 4, the whole is prior to the parts. Now, there are different ways of expressing this, but basically the whole would be a thought that I would have that I could express in English or in German. And once I have selected the right English sentence, that sentence is adequate if it expresses my meaning. Does that make sense to you? Now, what if I took a letter out of it and replaced it with another letter? Suppose I had John loves Mary, took the M out and put an H in there and have John loves Harry. What we have, ladies and gentlemen, is a completely different W-H-O-L-E, an entirely different whole. If I put the square root of -1 in there, we'd have gibberish. We'd have noise. We wouldn't have a real sentence. Now, the important point about the SETI research is that they make the following assumption, which I believe is a reasonable assumption, and here it is, that information can only come from an intelligent mind. So that if they discovered a signal from outer space that was random or was simple order, as Jodie Foster did in the movie Contact, it would not cause any suspicion. But in the movie Contact, I believe, she discovered a signal that contained, if I'm not mistaken, the first 20 prime numbers in a row. Now that is not random and it's not ordered, it is information bearing. And she immediately drew the conclusion that this signal was not produced by randomness or by the laws of nature, but by an intelligent agent. Why? Because information only comes from intelligent mind. Now, what's sauce for the SETI goose ought to be sauce for the DNA gander. And the single most important discovery that biologists have made for decades is that the bodies of living organisms, a frog's body, is different from a crystal because a living organism is constituted by information. And we talk about DNA and the genetic code and so on. Now, if somebody were to say, yes, but given enough time and given millions and billions of years and given the laws of nature, we could generate a DNA molecule, then the same argument could be used to shut down the entire SETI project. Because anytime we discovered a signal from outer space, like the first 20 prime numbers in a row, someone could always respond by saying, well, don't draw the conclusion that that came from an intelligent agent. It's more reasonable to think that given millions and billions of years and the laws of nature, that natural law and randomness would produce that. But no one would draw that conclusion, would they? And it's hard for me to believe someone would draw the same conclusion when it comes to the information in a DNA molecule. So the origin of the universe is backed by the second law of thermodynamics. The fine-tuning of the universe, I illustrated with the panel and the dials, and a rigged dice seemed to require a rigger. The third is the information that is found in DNA, and scientists themselves assume in the SETI project that information comes from an intelligent agent, and that's the most reasonable explanation of it. And then finally, the origin of mind or consciousness. Consciousness and mind exists. Indeed, I would assume that there's a lot of consciousness going on in this room, even as I'm speaking. At least this is my hope, ladies and gentlemen. Indeed, my hope is there's as much going on now as was going on 25 minutes ago. But in any case, consciousness is real. Consciousness is mental. Consciousness is disgustingly invisible. You can't see, touch, taste, smell, or hear a thought, a belief, a desire, a sensation like an emotion, or an act of will. I remember years ago when my daughter was in elementary school, we were having a little prayer time, and she said, "Daddy, if I could see God, it would be easier to believe in Him." And I said, "Honey, the problem is not that you haven't seen God. The problem is you've never seen Mommy." She said, "What do you mean, Dad?" Because Mom was sitting right here. And I said, "Well, if we could take Mommy's apart cell by cell without hurting her, and we could, and there are times I've wanted to, but that's, oh, don't look so pious. Don't look so pious out there." And I said, if we could take her apart cell by cell, we could find pieces of Mommy's brain. We could say, there's Mom's heart, or there's her lungs. But we would never run across anything in her brain or her body where we could say, so that's what Mom really believes about the Kansas City Chiefs, my favorite team. Or Mom does like the color red better than the color blue. Or Mom is feeling sad, there's her sadness. And guess what, honey? We would never come across any cell in Mommy's body where we would run up against her I or herself. Because Mommy's consciousness and her I or self are spirit, they're not matter. They're invisible. And so at least Mommy is small enough to have a body. God's too big, so let's pray. I gave each of my children $5,000 worth of therapy their senior year of Biola, precisely because of these kinds of incidents. Now, here's the problem. If you start the universe with matter, and all you do is you take matter, which, according to the description of matter, since what is called the mechanical philosophy in the 17th century, so since the original atomists, Locke, Newton, Boyle, and others, our scientific description of matter is that matter does not contain consciousness or the potential for consciousness. So if you start with matter, brute matter, and all you do is rearrange it according to the laws of chemistry and physics, guess what you're going to get? Rearranged matter. You're not going to get mind squirting into existence, because that's to get something from nothing. That's to get something from materials that don't have the potential to generate it. Now, because consciousness exists in us, the most reasonable explanation for the origin of consciousness is that the universe begins with a conscious being. If the universe begins with brute matter, there will be no explanation for the origin of consciousness. Why do I not believe what this scientist at Cornell said? Why do I not agree with Time magazine that science has made belief in God obsolete and our only way of knowing reality is through the hard sciences? Number one, I think that claim is false because it's self-refuting. Because the idea that we can only know reality through the sciences is itself something that can't be known through the sciences and would have to be a bare assertion for which no reason could be given. Number two, most of science, thank God for it, has nothing whatsoever to do with religion, and most of theology has just nothing to do with science. There's a small area of overlap. Is that area regularly and systematically hostile to the belief in God? Heavens no. I've just listed 4 areas where scientific discoveries have lent support to belief in God. Are there areas of difficulty? Yes, there are. There's evidence for the theory of evolution. And it's hard to square some parts of this theory of evolution with the early chapters of Genesis. Again, there's evidence for an old universe. Now, I happen to favor an old universe, but for those who hold to a recent universe and the days of Genesis are 6 24-hour days of creation, that's a problem. Again, we haven't found a lot of archaeological evidence yet for a universal flood of Noah. And there are other archaeological discoveries that have called into question certain teachings of the Bible, though in my opinion, the vast majority of archaeological discoveries have supported the Bible. But are there some that are problems? Yeah. And my response is, so what? What follows from that? That science as a whole is against belief in God? No. What follows is we've just got more work to do, that's all. So what I want to say is I want to set the record straight. Science is actually a friend of Christianity, not a foe. And science came from within the framework of a Christian worldview that made sense out of the assumptions of science. Science cannot be the only way we can know reality, because the claim that it is cannot itself be known by science. Most of science and most of theology have little or nothing to do with each other. In the small area where they overlap, are there problems? Yes. But what follows from that is we just have more work to do, that's all. But is it always in that small area against belief in God? No. There have been major discoveries, and I've listed 4 of them for you, that have actually lent support to belief in God as opposed to being contrary to belief in God.